Hey,
Hello,
Vaush, how you
hello.
doing, man?
I'm doing wonderfully. How about you?
I'm good. Thanks so much for making this happen. I really appreciate it.
Pleasure's mine. I'm live right now. Just to let you know. I believe I said that I would be in the email, but I'm remembering now that I don't know if I specified that. So I
Well,
am.
I don't think you did, but that's cool. I love it. That adds an interesting wrinkle to this.
Okay, I'm sorry. I normally say that. It is wonderful to have you on. Could you, for the sake of the audience, introduce yourself to them, and then we can get started?
Sure. My name's Luke Winkie. I'm a freelance journalist, kind of all over the place, and this story's for the Daily Beast. Been kind of watching your channel for a while. Always thought you'd be an interesting profile target, and I talked my editor into doing it. So yeah, that's basically how this came together, and you responded to my email, and that's how I ended up here.
Pleasure's mine. And yeah, please go right ahead.
For sure, yeah, I won't take up too much of your time. Just gonna
My
run
time
through
ain't
it. Just
that valuable. Don't worry about it.
yeah, but it'll be pretty straightforward. I guess let's start with you. How did you like? I don't know. Kind of give me the outline of your own sort of like political journey. Like, what kind of radicalized you? Your moral development, for lack of a better term. Like, how did you kind of arrive at the sort of ideological stance that you obviously have built a really successful brand around today?
Well, when I was younger, like in high school, I was a libertarian in the way I think a lot of young men default to, and a sort
Mhm.
of aversion to authority, translated, very much a "you can't tell me what to do, mom," extrapolated into
Sure.
a broader political position. But I grew more, I guess, economically liberal with time, and then when I went to college, I became a leftist in large part because I had an excellent sociology professor who loaned me some books, some of which were on the Black Panther Party. The assassination of Fred Hampton was one that I was particularly fond of. And from that point forward, it's mostly been about refining those basic beliefs. I think the fundamental principles I've held have always been consistent. It's
Mhm.
just a matter of how to best achieve them through policy.
Yeah, yeah. So you weren't one of those like I don't know, when I talk to my kind of left leaning friends, all almost kind of across the board, they all point to 2016 as kind of like a trigger moment for you. You were already kind of well within that thought before the Trump election.
Since 2012, that's probably when I would have started considering myself a leftist, yeah.
Sure, sure, yeah. I mean, so what was your like I mean, did you always envision having a YouTube channel or being kind of in this line of work? I guess what I'm asking is, did you want to be a YouTuber before you wanted to be a political YouTuber? Like, kind of, how did you get interested in this whole world?
I've always wanted to do this. I got invested in watching other live streamers back in around 2011 when the technology first became even remotely accessible. Mostly because I liked video games. I still do. Watching people play video games at a higher level was just fun to do live. But the idea of doing that myself was always incredibly appealing. It was never really viable, though. I mean, everyone knows that getting successful in this space is like winning a coin flip 50 times in a row. The odds are just not in your favor. Yeah, I was
Sure.
very surprised when things took off the way they did.
Yeah, yeah. When did you like YouTube took on a very kind of I remember around like kind of around the Trump election that YouTube took on like a more kind of heightened political texture, like that was kind of when I noticed the kind of right wing stuff popping up more and more on YouTube. Like all of a sudden, like I feel like a lot of YouTube creators like kind of had like a political stance, like or like kind of expressing it more openly. Is that something you noticed at all? Did that change the platform in any way? Did that make it more possible to, kind of catch fire with a show that's in large parts about politics?
Yeah, well, I think things changed significantly, in my opinion, right around the time of Gamergate, but even that was an extrapolation of pre-existing trends. Because before then, the big dominant political culture on YouTube were the new atheists, the
Right.
anti-Bible thumper, skeptics who were, epically owning religious fundies with facts and logic and such. But the continuous trend, whenever you see these big political waves on YouTube, is generally speaking, you have very confident and very aggressive white guys who have
Mhm.
channels where they make the opponent look very silly. They try to like bring them on for debates. They usually outperform the opposition. And the problem that I saw is like back in the 2016, 2017, post-Trump election era, you have a very aggressive right wing on YouTube, and the left wing is a bunch of like community theater kids doing book readings.
Right.
You have a bunch of smaller feminist channels that are comparatively very, I don't say this disrespectfully, I enjoyed their work at the time, relatively meek, not, I guess, built for contentious online engagement.
Sure. Yeah.
It's something that we lacked for a pretty long time.
This is kind of like a little bit off track, but I'm just kind of curious. Like, you're totally right about the atheism wave on early YouTube. It's weird to me, like at least the way I perceive it, a lot of those dudes kind of ended up being, you know, ended up kind of growing into more right wing presences or a little bit more like on that side of things when you kind of associate atheism with maybe a more leftist approach. I don't know. Were you do you relate to that at all? Were you all surprised to see that kind of atheist sort of movement morph into the kind of right wing movement that we see on YouTube now?
I was surprised at first, but it made more sense the more I considered it with time, because it feels
Yeah.
like some of the underlying trends were preserved. Oftentimes, people would criticize religiosity for its irrationality, but not for the political prescriptions made by the far-right religious types. So what you
Sure.
have is instead a secularization of the underlying trend of people with some degree of like social power, epically debunking this trend or another. And you'll see a translation of that logic because once Gamergate started, what did they start calling it? Progressivism, feminism, what have you, but a religion. They reframed it. Before, they were epically dunking on the Bible, and now they're epically dunking on the religious precepts of feminism, which include, whatever they wanted to say feminism was that day. But the underlying logic never changed. Only the subject of attack. The goal should be not just to respond to the existence of a bad social force, but to thoroughly critique it and the ways in which it's pernicious. And they never did that. So it made me feel, at least in retrospect, like that was never really the goal. It was just about being better than or feeling smarter than a particular group. Any group would do, really.
Yeah. You obviously you do a lot of debates on the channel. We're going to talk more about that in a second. Like, I don't know, how do you resist the satisfaction of just purely being in this game to epically dunk, as you put it? Because obviously you're very measured. That's not really the kind of posture you bring to a lot of not that you like, you'll go after bad arguments and things like that. But I don't know, how are you able to kind of remove the kind of ego bump from the satisfaction of having a really good comeback in debate to kind of focus more on your sort of interest in education or just giving a better message to young men that might be radicalized the wrong way?
I don't want to be, I don't want to come off as priestly here. I love me my dunks. I think they're very fun, but I think they're also very easy. It's not the most satisfying part of what I do, not by a long shot. What I've noticed after, like, I've consumed an ungodly amount of internet content here, a lot of internet dunks. And the fact of the matter is, getting a really good dunk doesn't require that much intelligence. A basic situational awareness and a bit of comedic timing is all you need to get a good dunk in most situations. It's a low bar. But oftentimes, I'll say this much. The feeling of completely deconstructing a bad argument to the point where months later you're going to get emails from the former followers of a person you debated saying, you
Mm-hmm.
pulled me off of this road. I really appreciate it. You helped me see how bad these arguments were. That is infinitely more satisfying than a dunk. If the dunks lead to that, if the rhetorical engagement builds that, puts people in that position, I think that's a wonderful thing. But that, to me, at least, is the most satisfying feeling. So maximizing
Yeah.
for that's what I care about.
I mean, you talked before that the dunk is a good way to get people to click on the video to absorb some more of the nuance and things like
You got to
that,
be
which is
funny, especially
yeah.
since there's the whole stereotype of the left being humorless, a stereotype which I think used to be far more deserved than it is now. A lot of left-leaning content online is shamelessly edgy. It used to be when far-right people on Twitter were, making a ruckus, the replies they would get from the left were always, you know, how could you do this? Something like that, moral outrage. And now, most often,
Yeah.
I think, if you go into the comments or like the replies below some big far right tweet, it's mostly people making jokes, telling them to kill themselves, or making jokes about how they're a pedophile or that they had sex with their mother or something or another like that, which, if nothing else, indicates a far greater willingness to get one's hands dirty than the
Mhm.
previous type of engagement the left, had. But outside of that, that tendency, it's important to be funny and relatable and what have you. And it's also, I think, a fairly authentic representation of how I like to talk to people. But it's important to never understand the dunks as a substitute for other things, because you don't want them to be thought terminating cliches. A good joke should be like an initiator for a good argument. If the good joke is the argument, what you're doing is you're hoping that your audience is careless enough to overlook the fact that you're skimping.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I was actually going to cover this later, but let's hit it now because you kind of touched on it a little bit. Honestly, one of the ways I first kind of heard about you was just seeing extremely far left, the kind of people that have like hammer and sickles in their Twitter names, just getting mad, being upset with Vaush, thinking that he's this, he's not radical enough, not a great torchbearer for, you know, have their interpretation of, what their politics, I guess, that you weren't far enough out there. I guess I'm sort of curious, like, what is it like to like? I mean, you've obviously seen that stuff, and you've gotten a lot of hate from kind of both fringes. Is that at all weird? Like, how do you kind of like? I guess yeah, we'll just start there. Like, what is it like to kind of be a pariah among that segment of the left?
I definitely think it's weird. I think a lot of people, especially young people online, get involved in politics these days because they feel very disempowered by the world they live in. They are achingly aware of problems in the world today, but very helpless when it comes to changing anything about those problems. So, in the same way that one might slam the steering wheel to the right to avoid veering to the left, even if it's an overcorrection, I think a lot of people turn to radicalism as an ends rather than as a means,
Right.
believing it's valuable not because it will solve the problem, but because radicalism itself, the act of deviating from center-leaning politics, is the solution. And I don't think that's true. Maybe it's a way of arriving at the solution. Maybe radical frameworks are helpful in finding, achievable goals, but that's not quite the same as the radicalism itself being the solution, because what you get into then is people who aesthetize essentially um a lack of nuance. They aesthetize an unwillingness to engage in pragmatism, which is frustrating for me. Oftentimes these people cite, radical leftist theorists, but if you go back and look at what a lot of these theorists wrote on and did, you'll find that a lot of them, by nature of their intelligence and their, worldly concerns, were quite practical people who
Yeah.
wrote extensively, not only on what they would like the world to be, but what they needed to do to achieve it. And some of the stuff Marx or Lenin wrote, was compared to some of the stuff that you'll see on Twitter, quite measured. Um,
Right.
and a lot of people, I mean, they don't actually read this stuff, so I can't expect them to all know that. But it's frustrating. I don't think it's that weird. I guess I hope that I can show people that it's possible to frame radicalism in a way that doesn't require like a sacrifice of practical engagement.
Yeah, I guess the thing I find kind of interesting about it, or just sort of weird about it, is I don't know. Like, this is a moment in American history where any sort of leftist momentum has like a modicum of presence in our national political conversation, and it's interesting to see how a lot of that stuff has kind of already kind of come down to a lot of, or it has boiled down to a lot of factualism, a lot of there's not like a already it feels like there isn't as much of a big tent as there needs to be for for that momentum for that momentum to continue to rev up speed. I'm kind of curious if you have any thoughts on that, where how even while a lot of that stuff is a lot of those people are so far from power or wresting power that you know we're still focused on, or a lot of people are still focused on, Vaush saying something that doesn't totally line up with their morals. Like, why do you think that is kind of broken down that way already?
Yeah, I think well, the powerlessness can get people to hyperfixate on things that they can change. They can't
Mhm.
change the American economy or whatever, but they can, I mean, they know they can post something underneath a comment of mine and I'll see it. And that is a
Yeah.
kind of, action and reaction that they feel the effect of, at least potentially.
Mhm.
I think at this moment in time, our primary consideration as leftists and as liberals, because I know some are watching right now, is impeding fascism. That's the main concern. The right, January 6th, they don't care about democracy. They're undermining the processes that we have to ensure a fair election. That's our first consideration, I think. And what a lot of
Yeah.
leftists don't seem to understand is that, first of all, the left can't win with our numbers. We need big numbers. And second of all, if you want those big numbers, what liberals need to be told is that we are the mechanism by which democracy can be saved. Liberal Democrats aren't enough because they may chide and tut-tut and wag their fingers, but they're
Mhm.
still permissive of fascist entryism into the government. A fair, reasonable, just democratic government, a proper one, a strong one, would be, say, arresting these Republicans on sedition charges, a charge that I
Yeah.
think, by the way, would be very fair given these circumstances, great many of them. Um, and we need to sell that. That is what the left will bring. Liberals will allow fascism to win. We will not. That's what we need to be selling people on. And if you can do that, buddy, you can convince the average liberal Democrat that Joe Biden has been too soft on this threat to our democracy, but we won't be. That is a strong hook right there. But lefties
Sure.
don't see that. They think that liberals are lost causes. Participating in electoral democracy is cringe anyway. And the best we can do is just sort of, get drunk and wait for everything to fall apart and then just hope socialism arises from the ashes. And I think that is a thoroughly nihilistic and unproductive worldview.
Do you ever feel nihilistic?
No, not really. I try to
Yeah.
think of I mean, at the end of the day, we all do our best, right? I know. Well, I mean, I don't do my best. Don't get me wrong. I still sleep in, but I put in a good effort. I think as long as everyone's putting in a good effort, you can feel good about your life at the end of the day.
Sure.
There are plenty of just movements that never bore fruit until hundreds of years after the deaths of their participants. Would we
Yeah.
want John Brown, for example, to have died sad because his slave revolt did not bear purchase, did not
Sure.
succeed in ending slavery? Maybe he died then, but what world, did he leave in his wake? How many decades afterwards were his plans brought to fruition, at least in some form? Um,
Mhm.
we shouldn't be sad about stuff like that. We have no idea what ripples we leave in our wake.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Let's zoom back a little bit, get a little bit out of the weeds, and kind of talk about some more general stuff about you. Simply put, like, why do you like debating so much? Like, why do you believe in debating as a format that can do good? Obviously, it does good numbers for you, and people like watching you debate. But like, what is it about the just the practice of debating that just keeps you wanting to keep doing it? You've not gotten bored of it clearly, or maybe you have. I don't know, but yeah, just tell me about your love of debating.
I'm just a very argumentative and contentious person. I just think it's very, very fun. I've been arguing
Mhm.
with everyone I can for my entire life. I am unbearable in person. Any ex-partner of mine or any family member or any friend will testify to that. It is just my nature. I just love doing it. And I'm very happy that there is, a niche of political, I would argue political effectiveness that can be mined out there. Debate obviously is a centerpiece of political engagement. It has been for as long as modern politics has been around. Um,
Cool.
and people like ideas clashing, confronting directly. Now, often people criticize this. They say, "Well, sophistry is the nature of political engagement. It has nothing to do with truth. It has everything to do with witty one-liners and getting people to remember hook phrases and dirty politics." And to that, I say, you're completely correct. But just because the game is rigged doesn't mean we're not allowed to participate in it. You don't
Mhm.
you don't get to not play. That's like saying that you shouldn't. Let's say leftist revolutionaries shouldn't like prepare for conflict because they are unfairly disadvantaged against the tyrannical government they look to overthrow. What kind of excuse is that? I mean, you still have to try, don't you? I
Yeah.
happen to be pretty good at it. I think, and by the way, I should say, it's not just a big political, like big sweeping thing. The skills that you use in debate, the basic rhetorical skills, are skills of persuasion and of confidence. And people in my audience learn those. And even if people in my audience aren't out there debating to audiences of thousands of people, they do talk with their family. They do talk with their friends. Lord
Right.
knows how many emails I've gotten saying, effectively, thank you for giving me the skills to debate my parents. They accept my trans identity now. They usually don't phrase it that directly, but I've gotten quite a few emails to that effect. Um, Remarkable work can be done with a bit of persuasive talent, and if I can teach that, if anything else, I think that's valuable.
You know what? As someone that I don't know if you relate to this at all. As someone that grew up in a pretty Christian household and went to the school of cringe atheist YouTube back in my youth. Learning a couple of rhetorical tricks from a YouTuber in those early stages of moral development that can be useful. That's a good thing to have in your toolkit as you're trying to, you know, express yourself to people in your life before you have all the tools yourself.
Undeniably. And I mean, that's the value in a lot of ways of the internet, right? You get essentially unrestricted access to a huge range of political opinions that otherwise you wouldn't really have access to. Of course, that can be a very bad thing, depending on how the
Yeah.
cosmic dice are rolled. But I think it also, the window it gives into some people's lives, people who maybe grow up in a repressive fundamentalist household, a few minutes of content online can fundamentally restructure the rest of their life. It can shape the path they're going to take irrevocably in a way
Mm.
that they might not have been able to otherwise. And that's something that we should do our best to maximize as long as we send people on the good roads.
Did you experience that? Did you experience that yourself?
I'm fortunate to have had very open-minded parents from the get-go. While I
Yeah.
learned plenty online, I never felt as though I was breaking free of their reign. If anything, they've moved more over to me with time. As one of the reasons I say liberals can be moved over with X or with Y is because that's happened with my parents. They see what's happening in the country right now. It's very difficult to remain moderate under these circumstances.
Right, right, yeah. So what did you like? Yeah, I imagine that you were always pretty articulate and you did your homework for a long time. But like, was there like, did it take you a while to get good at debating? From the MAGA, the MAGA. What am I talking about? The MAGA agitators. Like, is that something that you think you slipped into completely naturally from the first time you started doing it, or do you think you got better at it the more reps you got? Like, how did you kind of develop those skills?
I think I came in on a good foot, largely because I've always really enjoyed public speaking, and I've always been, this is kind of a cliche sentiment, but I was a bit of a class clown back in high school. So
Mhm.
getting people to laugh, the skills required to get people to laugh are almost indistinguishable from the skills necessary to win debates. This is one of the reasons why comedians often do really well in disarming political figures when they speak with one another. Um, it's very, very effective. There's just a sort of subversive language employed in comedy that's really good at disarming the purported self-seriousness of political figures, which is one of the reasons that comedians historically have been, political agitators, very effective at sort of satirizing political figures and often feared by people in power. But anyway, I had those skills going in. In terms of, you know, getting better over time, I used to get a lot angrier while debating. Um,
Yeah.
I got so mad, which led to some pretty funny moments, don't get me wrong, but I'm a lot more detached now. I think an effective rule of public speaking, I don't get nervous when I speak publicly, but a lot of people do. And a good rule to public speaking is don't imagine you're the one doing the speaking. Imagine you're a supportive member of the audience watching you speak. When an insult
Mhm.
is thrown at you, maybe you fluster, but the person in the audience doesn't fluster. They just think, oh, what retort is my guy going to come up with next? It allows you to distance yourself from the personal engagement. Think of it a bit more strategically. And I've done that more with time. And I tend to be remarkably calm during convos now. Or at least
Yeah.
as calm as I want to be. I should say I have more control over how calm I am during convos now.
Do you think someone like Tim Pool's like a good debater? Like I think we both probably find his views pretty repugnant, and I think like most kind of MAGA leaning talking points are, um, I don't think they really hold up to much scrutiny. But do you think those guys are good at you know presenting arguments in a way that's hard to diffuse sometimes? Like, what's your take on like the average skill of those sorts of adversaries?
Tim Pool is special. I don't think he's a good debater. He's a phenomenal rhetorician.
Mhm.
Because his strategy in direct disagreements so often is making it impossible to go hard against him. I know. I mean, I've been in studio with him. The way he frames arguments, he doesn't make strong prescriptive statements to attack. He talks about other people's strong prescriptive statements. He reframes things as though he's this moderate who's bringing to you the concerns of this group that he's just, looking out for. This is a really effective rhetorical tactic because it means that you have to match the tone that they're offering. And you
Yep.
also can't go super hard against anything wrong they say because, of course, they're not saying it themselves. They're just presenting the concerns of other people to you. I think it's a very dishonest way of going about things, but I can't deny it's very effective. Um,
Yeah.
I see this a lot. I see this done a lot as well. The right has definitely pulled back on the boldness over the past couple of years. Back in
Mhm.
2018, 2019, very direct, very strong with the arguments, very comfortable making direct prescriptions. But now they tend to lean further on euphemism, on argument by proxy. Even people like Ben Shapiro, who, while incredibly dishonest, I mean, he's certainly rhetorically proficient, Um,
Yeah.
Even people like Ben Shapiro, you can see the conversations that he has with people. Rarely does he make these strong arguments he'll defend. He'll do these like, well, even you have to admit that. And, people like you say stuff like that, but don't you believe there are other people out here who, and when things are framed that way, it's not about you versus them. It's like, well, now we're arguing about the abstract of what other people believe. And,
Oh,
there's no easy way to get around tricks like that, by the way. Trust me, I've thought well enough about it. It's just a matter of feeling out the vibes of the conversation, trying to ground it back. I don't know what
yeah.
these people believe. I can't speak for them. I'm curious what you believe. You try to get it back to them because if they make the mistake, then you can go after them properly for
And you also have the core advantage, which you're right and they're wrong.
it. That
Which
definitely helps. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious. Like, what is your relationship with a guy like Tim Pool or those other dudes? Like, I mean, like you are able to. I don't know. Like a lot of those right wing guys, you give them credit the sense that they're willing to kind of bring on whoever to their shows. I guess you can give them credit for that. But like, a lot of other like it's hard for me to I think a lot of other kind of left-leaning content creators, there's just kind of a blacklist there. They would never sort of there's more enmity there where you are like you can pop on a Temple broadcast kind of whenever you want. Like are you guys I doubt you would necessarily say you're friendly with them, but I'm kind of curious to know what is the sort of off-air dynamic between you and those guys.
It is an interesting one. So what I do is fundamentally, it's a political project and a business.
Mhm.
So my personal feelings about people aren't the only things that I take into consideration when I manage my online engagement. There's an interesting thing going on with some people like Tim Pool or Charlie Kirk, where
Mhm.
now I think my positions on these people's political views are well known, but in terms of how I engage with them directly, if I was super like mean to them, I get like if I was like attacking them on social media a bunch, I think I would be doing them a favor because that's the stuff that they often point at as an excuse to not have me on in studio. And I can
Right.
reach their audience in studio. I can't reach it on Twitter. None of their audience members are going to look at me epically dunking them on Twitter and go like, "Oh, wow, you're right. Socialism is the light of humanity." But
Right.
if I maintain this veneer of civility, I can talk with them and potentially reach a much larger audience. And I can tell from the emails that I've gotten, the polls that I've done within my community, the
Mhm.
effect of my conversations with Charlie Kirk and Tim Pool have been enormous in terms
Yeah.
of, yeah, like the proportional effect that it's had. Now, often you have the opposite problem with people on the left, where like disagreements between them and I are like really interpersonally vitriolic. It should be noted, I'll have almost anyone on my stream. I like conversations with people that I dislike for the most part, as long as I think that it'll be fun and engaging and potentially educational.
Yeah.
But I feel like a lot of people on the left that I have that relationship with don't treat their platforms the way I treat mine. They treat their platforms like an extension of their personal animosity. Whereas
Right. Sure.
people like Charlie Kirk and Tim Pool, they have like managers. They have people who book appointments. Um,
Mhm.
so in a way, there's like this a framework that allows me to get more out of my engagements with people who I have less in common with, because they're distanced enough from their production schedule that they can allow people like me to get a hold of their audience. Whereas someone on LeftTube who despises me might do all their work personally, might not book me because they hate me personally. And as
Yeah.
a result, I don't get a chance to talk with them.
Yeah, no, I totally get where you come from there. This is again going back in the weeds, but I am kind of curious, and forgive me, this will be kind of an esoteric question, but
Mhm.
like I, like I think about how you sort of embrace some fairly common sense, the wide consensus liberal opinions, like for instance that we should be pro-Ukraine, that the Russian invasion is bad. I think a lot of leftists would agree with that, at their core, but like kind of putting that out there publicly or being against, putting out there publicly their support of Ukraine or their disdain for, what happened on January 6th. It just, there's a cringeness to that. There's a liberal cringeness to that kind of stops a lot of left content creators from expressing that kind of from trumpeting that super loudly. I guess I'm kind of curious to know, like, do you think that is there any part of you kind of supporting those things that might be sort of cringe in the left, but are fairly well, that are huge parts of like the sort of liberal democratic platform? Do you think that has uh, do you think that has kind of brought more people to you that are maybe left curious? Is there anything about that I guess do you think that that is maybe in a way to kind of get the left back on your I guess I don't know what I'm saying, to get the left to understand that by being so conscious of not being cringe that you are alienating people in some way. I'm kind of all over the place with this question,
I
but
fully
hopefully you.
understand what you're saying. Don't worry.
I guess, yeah.
No ambiguity at all.
Okay.
Um, I often feel that a lot of people in the left, for them, leftism is the political project of making sure people in their social space know that they're not liberals.
Okay.
um,
Sure. Yeah.
which is very frustrating to me. Leftism is, after all, a logical extension of liberal Renaissance ethical values. Egalitarianism and freedom are, of course, like principal, values of the French Revolution, of the Enlightenment. And
Hmm.
when Karl Marx critiqued capitalism, critiqued liberalism, he didn't do so as an ultimate refutation of those values, but rather as a condemnation of their hypocrisy, that capitalism fails to economically extrapolate those values out into a proper economic system. I run into these situations. It's very frustrating. There are leftists who will agree with what I say, but ask me to tone it down a little bit. And I must say, I don't understand. If you want liberals to get on your side, they have to believe they share something in common with you. What does it look
Right.
like to the average liberal when Russia, wholly unjustifiably, invades Ukraine? They turn to the left, and the left is having an honest-to-God internal argument over whether or not this is NATO's fault, a psychotic position unsupported by any of the victims of this invasion or of liberal democracies broadly. But I mean, how do you
Right.
think that makes us look with Bernie Sanders and Bernie or Busters? Right? Bernie Sanders loses the primaries. We get to be mad about that. Don't get me wrong, I'm happy to.
Right.
Yeah, that's fine. um but then it's Biden or Trump. There is no third option. Abstemiousness is not going to change the nature of our democracy. In fact, given the fact that America has a pretty low federal election voter participation rate, you would think that would be an indication that, if anything, the abstemiousness is benefiting the systems of power that are already in place. But it is two possible outcomes here. You have Trump or Biden. They are very different people with very different political positions. And I think,
Mhm.
again, if the liberals see this dichotomy, they turn to the left and see arguing over whether or not having Trump in office is worth the moral sin of tarnishing our leftist identity by voting for a liberal like Biden. These are psychotic debates held by people who have never touched grass and may die without having ever done so. I am loud about the positions that I hold, even when they are uncontroversial and even when they are liberal aligned, because I am right to do so. Because the people who are wrong are often so wrong that their wrongness spills out into broader political discourse and taints the optics of leftists, taints our ability to convince other people. I wish leftists would do this more often. It's not as though other successful leftist movements in the past haven't held on tightly to ideas that were hegemonically acceptable within their societies. Did
Mhm.
Lenin not endorse at times Russian nationalism? Did he not bask in the culture of his people? Of course he did. Obviously. Look at Ho Chi Minh, look at Mao. Were these people all like, yeah, burn down the state, we hate everyone here types? No, they knew how to pick their battles. And they knew that when it came to rounding up, Russian workers or serfs or rice farmers in the Chinese countryside, you need common ideas that play to the interests and well-being of the common people, not this hoity-toity elitist online leftism where real issues that matter to real people are treated as cringe because being correct on them puts you too close in proximity to other people who are also correct but also don't agree with you on everything else. It's just a very, very, very myopic mindset that I have no respect for.
It's weird. Yeah, you're right. It's like the idea of like being kind of uh like towing the line, something like January 6th. There's not really a material reason you'd want to do that. It's more of a vibes thing, and it's always been. It's really hard to figure out. Anyway, let's zoom back a little bit, and we can wrap this up pretty soon. Just a few more things for you. This has all been great. Yeah, I guess like this. Yeah, zooming back way far. Like, how do you prepare going into a debate? Do you do any preparation work at this point? You just kind of go in there and fire it off. Like, how do you? What is the kind of homework you do when you know you're on air with Charlie Kirk the next morning, whatever?
If there's a very specific topic that is going to be discussed, I will do research on it, usually something very technical, or if I know that some study is going to come up. But for the most part, I try not to do any research at all. It's
Mhm.
kind of a point to my channel. I often feel the arguments that I'm pushing against are so bad that a person can push against them with very minimal education on the subject. A cursory glance at a Wikipedia article will give you enough ammunition to debunk almost any argument presented on the Senate floor by Republicans. And I want to hold true to that. I don't want to gatekeep what I do. 98% of what I do and what I get in my channel is rhetorical, a skill that I do my best to teach people who watch me. Um,
Uh,
but in terms of like the gate kept like knowledge base, honestly, I think you're doing many of these conservatives too much respect by researching stuff beforehand, because every time I do this, the research stuff never comes up. We always get hung up on some really obvious basic shit beforehand. It just never ends up working out. Did you hear about that Heritage study, the Heritage Foundation study on trans youth health care accessibility with minor consent? Did you hear about this? It came out
no,
yesterday.
I mean, maybe if it rings a bell, but yeah, tell me more.
Yeah, I went over it because, okay, Heritage Foundation, great. Don't trust these people, but we have to know the data, don't we? I might as well have not bothered. In the future, when somebody brings up that study, I might as well just make a farting noise with my mouth and smack them. That study is dog shit. It's absolutely worthless. There's no point. I read it only to educate myself on the severity of its incompetence. There was no, like, this is what I get. This is what I'm rewarded with, for bothering to look into this stuff. This is the level that they feel entitled to participate at. It's just first of all, and this is a purely egotistical response, but I do find it more than a little bit insulting. And second of all, like when I talk with conservatives, this isn't even what comes up, It all turns
Yeah.
into to arm wrestling. I think that listen, I'm not an anti-intellectual, okay? Researching and thoroughly understanding a subject is a beautiful thing, and I think intrinsically worthwhile, even if it can't be put to any immediate use. I think that knowledge is incredibly valuable. But when it comes to arguing against conservatives, especially, so often that's just not the subject at hand.
Yeah.
And I want people in my audience to feel that confidence. I want them to feel. I don't want them to ever be presented with an argument from a conservative and think, oh, because I'm not familiar with this one specific bit of info, I have no chance here. Odds are you have every chance. Ask basic questions. Hey, can you tell me a bit about this study? What did they test for? What were they measuring? Oh, can you tell
Yeah.
me about these results? They're never able to answer these questions because they usually are just memorizing talking points anyway. So, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I also wanted to circle back to something you mentioned, and obviously is kind of a big part of your story is just introducing people to leftist thought that have only heard about or only interpreted leftist thought through kind of right wing content creators, and getting them in the mix or just reaching them in some ways. I'm just kind of curious more emotionally, what is the sort of satisfaction you get when you remove the boogeyman of socialism from someone who has gotten the wrong ideas and has kind of gone down, a bad path. Like, what does that do for you? Just from just getting the sort of satisfaction, from the work you're putting into, and just the legacy you're leaving behind, all that kind of stuff.
Well, I think many of the basic arguments that you can use to advocate for socialism are fairly intuitively understandable. We live in, a liberal. I'm American. We live in a liberal democracy. We are at least nominally in favor of democracy as a guiding political principle. The idea of economic democracy follows naturally, and this is another bit of the rhetorical game as well. When people argue against you, when you frame things appropriately, they then argue against democracy itself. And you can extrapolate that. What other arguments would they have made? Would they have sided with, King, King Henry back in the day? Would they have been calling for the execution of the patriots? No. You can run down that road as far as you want. I think it's very satisfying to demystify a lot of this stuff because, and I especially see this in the left circles, a lot of people are oh, sorry, George, not Henry. I always get George and Henry mixed up. Those are the only two English kings that I remember.
Don't worry, I
It's
got
one of them's the Hamilton one, and the other one's the one who founded the English Protestant Church. And yeah, I always get them. Well, anyway,
I'm not the right being like he got his UK royal lineage is a disaster. Don't worry about it.
it's a point of pride as a socialist to not give a shit about the royal family. Um, but yeah, I think oftentimes I think people on the left also aren't very confident in their understanding of these values because they argue for them in very abstract terms. Abstract political arguments aren't inherently bad, but the truly confident are able to plant their feet in the ground and say, yes, I want this exact thing. That's confidence right there, because then you're accountable for bad results. And oftentimes when people advocate for socialism, anarchism, communism, it's this flowery purple prose, this, I hope to live in an era where every man's labor is done but for the benefit of his own and those of his kin. All right, well, what the fuck does that mean? Give me a tax rate. Give me a number. People think that demystifies socialism, but that's the thing. I don't want socialism or communism or whatever else to be mystified. That's not the point of a political ideology, to be some kind of it's not Lord of the Rings lore, we're not reading up on this isn't the Silmarillion, there's no value in mystery here. All this stuff, when applied, communism, when applied, should be as rote and boring as any tax accountant's understanding of modern political systems. The point isn't to be interesting, it's to make people's lives better. So confidence in delivering these arguments, what will it make people's lives look like? How will it make people's lives better? Even if you have to demystify things, I would take that approach over anything else. And I think I've seen a lot of people responsive to that. I get a lot of emails and I see a lot of people in my chat, many of whom are watching right now, I assume, for whom socialism was kind of an abstract project in the past. And now
Yeah.
it feels like some, reasonable thing. It's a thing that can be done. It's not some mystical, untried enigma. It could be done, and I think we can do it. I don't know if we will do it. Life's complicated, but I think we can.
Yeah, and kind of going up that a little bit, I think one thing anyone can glean from this conversation or just your content in generally is you are an optimist in the sense that you think people can be reasoned with. That you can, that with a lot of conversation, if you present a good argument, if you are able to show people the light in a certain way, in a certain refraction, that they will, they may change their viewpoints on things, which is kind of an opinion that's sort of fallen out of vogue, I think, among a lot of leftists. When I talk to my kind of left-leaning friends, a lot of them have kind of abandoned or have given up on the idea that that you can kind of change people's minds about a lot of these issues. I guess I'm just sort of curious, what sort of gives you that faith that kind of across the board that most people are not too far gone?
Yeah, it's not everyone can't have their mind changed, but anyone can. I think as a stochastic project of changing people's minds. My channel has been, at least to my mind, moderately successful. There are people in my community who used to be members of basically every political demographic, from neo-Nazis to anarcho-capitalists to fundamentalist Christian conservatives. And I think, at the end of the day, I never look at a person that I'm arguing with and think of them purely as like an unmovable construct. Usually
Mm.
because when I debate people, they're other public figures, and it's really their audience that I'm trying to win over, right? Like when I talk to Charlie Kirk, Charlie Kirk makes money from his positions. I'm not going to change Charlie Kirk's mind. Maybe his mind could be changed, hypothetically somehow, but in that debate, that's not my goal. I try to reach his audience, and I can't get all of them, but some of them I think can be gotten. The important part is to never give up hope that it's possible to do that. And because you're not losing anything for it, you can believe simultaneously that it is possible to change the minds of misguided,
Yeah.
ill-begotten people, but also believe in any other possible political prescription. To do otherwise is to become essentialist, and essentialism is the enemy of leftist thought. You never, ever, ever want to believe that people are what they are because that's what they are. That fake tautology is a really effective way to uh, to dehumanize others in the worst possible way, not as some like pithy little like rhetorical bit, like oh haha these animals, but to think of them as non-political agents. You dematerialize them. We're all
Right.
material factors in a material world, forces that pull and push on each other to produce certain outcomes, some of which seem, in retrospect, virtually inevitable. But when you reduce a person to some unchanging, unmoving construct, something that can't be affected with political arguments, you dematerialize them. They're no longer a part of the system. They're just bedrock. And this is a faltering political analysis. It makes you weaker. It makes you less able to understand and to predict how people's beliefs change. Um, Especially since so often lefties will only ascribe this immaterialism to people who are very, very, very far right, which
Mhm.
is, so they'll believe any liberal could be moved over to being a Nazi given the right conditions, but not the
Right.
other way around. This is inconsistent political, political analysis, and I think it leads to, oh, how should I say? Are you familiar with the Kalergi plan?
I am not.
I believe I have the Kalergi plan. I'm thinking of the right thing. Let me make sure. Yes, yes. No, wait. Kalergi plan, far right conspiracy theory, the Nazi conspiracy theory. That's right. Okay.
Mhm.
So after I believe World War One, I think World War One, there was a
Right.
person who wanted to pacify the savage Germans. See, because the Germans, they had World War One kind of pinned on them a little, maybe a little more than was fair. After, so it thought, okay, so we need to pacify them. And the way in which this Kalergi fellow wanted to pacify them was to distill their blood, have the women have sex with the Italians and the
Mhm.
Norwegian people and the French and so on. You know, the you have a very complicated political situation, World War One, being distilled into this essentialist understanding of what it was that made Germany a participant. And if essentialism is the level of political analysis you're engaging in, what answers are there but death and eugenics? There aren't.
Mhm.
Which is why essentialism is a bedrock of every single society that has ever turned towards genocide and eugenics to address broad social issues. It doesn't
Right.
work, obviously. It's horrifically inhumane. And frankly, it's below us as leftists. I'm sorry, I know I ramble, but I feel passionately about this. This is a deep misstep that leftists are making if they're abandoning this project, especially so soon.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Just a couple more things I wanted to hit you with, and then we can wrap this up. Because I know we've been on for 45 minutes now, and
It's been my
sure
pleasure.
you got a plan tonight. But yeah, I going back to I guess I'm going back to that question. How much do you think about like are there people out there that you just wouldn't want to platform on your stream? Are there people far enough? Like, would you bring on like a straight up neo-Nazi? I mean, I'm talking in extremes here, but I mean that's an element that's kind of in our political mainstream somehow now. Like, I don't know, how much thought do you give to the platforming question?
The only criteria I have is could the attention they receive by going on my platform be more beneficial than any positive outcomes I could get from debunking what they say? even in the best possible circumstances. There are people who are like that, you know. I've had Nazis on my stream, probably a
Mhm.
decent number of them, and you know, I think I do pretty well. You know, I beat Bloodborne for the first time while arguing about the Jewish question with a Nazi. The expansion, I mean, I killed oh, what's the name? Not Rom, the last one, the one that screams.
Yeah, the guy that comes out of the big whale.
Yes, Orphan of Cos, the Orphan of Cos, or Cosm, as some say. While debating the Jewish question, phenomenal. I won both. For me, it's really about, do they just benefit from the attention? So there are communities who are so vacuous. I think it's blood sports mostly, where their first concern, first and foremost, you know, is simply the engagement, drama for drama's sake. And to such an audience, they have a champion who speaks to me. And if I speak to that champion, sometimes I get the feeling there is nothing I could say, nothing whatsoever I could say, literally no combination of words, no inflection, that could move their audience, because they are purely there for entertainment. There's not even
Right.
a pretense of truth seeking. And when that's the environment, when that's the feeling I get, um, that those people I don't like to engage with, because they only benefit from my platform, from the size of my
Right.
platform. I've mostly noticed this, by the way, not from the far right, but from some people who purport to be leftists, like
Mhm.
the tanky crowd. There are some people there and some communities there that are so, and I could armchair, you know, I could armchair a psychiatrist of a million possible explanations for this, but you know, they're so detached from meaningful political analysis that if their person came on here, made 99 claims that I dunked on them for, and then for their 100th they called me fat and left, their community would only be celebrating the fact that they succeeded in the arduous goal of calling me fat. And to
Right.
such a group, what can I do to win by my standards? The answer is nothing. So that's what I keep an eye out for. In
Yeah.
terms of how serious the person's political views are, I will have any number of neo-Nazis on here if I felt their audiences were capable of being swayed, however minutely.
Sure, sure, that makes sense. And you touched on something that I wanted to ask you about. Why do you think video games has become kind of a good? Maybe you just like playing games, and you know it's something to do while you're talking to people on stream, or maybe you've given more thought to this. Like, what do you think about? Why do you think playing video games has become? Because you're not the only one that does this, but has become like a decent vector for political conversation, debate, bringing people into a stream for some pretty heady political talk that wouldn't necessarily tune into otherwise. Like, why do you think video games is a good medium for that?
A few things. First of all, there's a demographic overlap. The people who are loudest about games and online politics both tend to be white men. So there's definitely sort of a proportional bias there. I think a lot of it also works to dispel the perceived seriousness of politics.
Yeah,
Because it wasn't that long ago that the online politics game was really just some specialized forums, people who, I mean, really, if you go back 10 or 15 years, oftentimes online politics was constrained almost entirely to like policy specific, like real politics circles, like groups of people who actually have a political or business interest in the outcomes of some elections or policies. Nowadays, it's like we're off to the gladiatorial arenas. People are taking bets on who's going to be killed out there. It's a whole bread and circus deal now, and the fact that it's been, I suppose you could call that democratized, means that I think you're going to see it appeal more and more, and overlap with more and more the kinds of media that people consume broadly as well. It's a sort of intentional um, demystification. How
sure.
serious can politics really be if you can ramble about it while playing Minecraft, right?
I remember tuning into Hassan's stream on the night of the Ukraine invasion, and the headline was just like, "Russia invades Ukraine." The next line was like, "Elden Ring later," and I just thought that to me is the epitome of of our political moment in a lot of ways. Speaking of that, I wrote a story about Hassan last year, and I posed the same question to you. We can leave on this. I'm just curious for you. You know, your how do you kind of square, how do you kind of meld like, I'm making a lot of money off this. This is a great job for me. I've become famous. I'm a famous YouTuber, which is, like, as you mentioned at the top, it's something that you've, thought I've wanted for a long time. While also, wanting to do a social good, while wanting to feel that, like, I'm living by my ethics, with my ethics. This is not some like right wing gotcha, like, oh, you're making money while claiming to be a socialist. I promise you, I'm not asking that question in that degree. But I'm just kind of curious for you, like how do you kind of feel at peace with your success, living by your ethics, living by your creed, and thinking that all those things are aligned and moving in the same direction?
I got in hot water a few times for this with the Hassan thing. I don't really mind that much, people being wealthy socialists, you know. At the end of the day, in a capitalist society, political power and influence correlate pretty much directly to wealth. And as a product of that, given the fact that we want prominent and powerful socialists, I mean, we kind of have to, there's no way around
Yeah.
that. You need those to win. It is inevitable that there's going to be within those circles a disproportionate accumulation of wealth. Now, I do think it's quite nice when people are generous with their money, and I mean, I try. I donate quite a bit to charity. I raise quite a bit to charity. I pay my editors, frankly, too much, but that's they shanghaied me with their contracts. What am I but the victim there? But in terms of the like feeling comfortable with what you are and what you do, I just think it's important to remember that this is always going to be the struggle of people who are fighting for a better world than the one they live in. Whether
Mhm.
you're an egalitarian today or hundreds of years ago, whether you're, a person conscious of animal rights who isn't necessarily a vegan, or hell, if you are a vegan but still participate in any number of other industries that rely on animal exploitation, whether you're an
Yeah.
anti-colonialist but you still pay your taxes to the US government, and Lord only knows where that goes. If people are looking to feel guilty, they will find sources of guilt. But I'm not looking to feel guilty, and I'm never guilty. I do what I
Yeah.
can with what I have, and I also live a comfortable life because I want to. If we
Mhm.
adhere to higher standards of self-flagellation, if we are constantly scrutinizing, constantly self-checking, second guessing, am I being generous enough? Am I this or that? What we're inevitably doing is establishing a social standard where it is more difficult for people to become powerful socialists because they're subjected to higher degrees of scrutiny, higher degrees of self imposed guilt. And while I do think there's a place for conversations like these, should socialists be showing off, $200,000 Porsches and doing like,
Mhm.
meme tages about them getting in it and like spilling soda everywhere on purpose? So they're like, oops, then they buy a second $200,000 Porsche because it's,
Right.
yeah. Like, can we have a conversation about those things? Absolutely. But I don't think guilt has to play any part in that at all. I just think that's an unhealthy, reflexive response.
Yeah, no, I get where you're coming from there. Anyways, Vosh, this was actually one last thing before I let you go. Do any of the mean comments ever get to you, or are you like at this point, you've been doing this for long enough that you've been able to stay level headed when you know some nasty things are written about you on Twitter, or kind of pop into your chat feed, or trickle across the timeline? Like, how do you kind of roll with those punches?
They don't bother me anymore.
Yeah.
I get quite a lot of them, and quite a few death threats and other expressions of people
Mhm.
displeasure in my existence. But at the end of the day, you do give other people permission to hurt you, or you do not. It sounds simplistic, but I think not of myself, but of the examples set by minority groups. I'm a white cis guy. I'm not straight, but I don't really get any shit for that.
Mhm.
But if I was, say, black in the 1950s, how many people hate me today? Let's say, I don't know, 1 million. It might be more or less. I genuinely don't know. But let's say a million, right? How many people could you fairly say hate you if you were a black person living, in Georgia in 1952? You could
Mhm.
reasonably estimate, and this hate has far greater consequence, by the way. My hate comes packaged with a cushy job. That hate doesn't. And they
Mhm.
lived. And not only did they live, they were defiant. And I think a lot of them, any minority group who had to deal with that kind of hate, they learned to live not only in spite of the hatred, but also they learn to not care about it in the abstract. Sure, they'll care if they're, harassed directly or whatever. That's, happening right then there. But the abstract of that hatred is it fades away into a kind of a dull half consciousness, background white noise, literally white noise in that particular example. And don't get me wrong, that's not a good state to live in. It's still horrible to think about that. And of course, I'm not happy that there are people out there who dislike me, but you learn to live in spite of it. And I am uniquely gifted with an opportunity to change the minds of some of the people who hate me. And every email that I get saying, oh, I used to dislike you, but then I saw this and I feel this way now, is worth easily 10,000 of the people who I know dislike me silently and anonymously.
Absolutely.
So yeah, in that respect, I feel, whatever derision I receive is infinitesimal compared to that of like the average black person back in the 50s, and I'm in far better a position to deal with it.
Totally. Yeah, that makes sense. All right, Vaush, this is great. Thank you so much for taking the time, man. We'll get this up soon. And yeah, again, thank you for being super down and super prompt and making this happen.
The pleasure was mine. Have a wonderful day.
You too. Enjoy the rest of your stream.
Bye.
Bye.
He tried to catch me at the end there. He said, enjoy the rest of your stream, and he almost got me to say you too. But I'm smart. I didn't fall for it. I didn't say you too. Good talk. No, that was a really nice interview. Also, 7,000 people are here for it. Normally, that many people don't stick around for interviews. Well, that's nice to know. That was a good conversation. I enjoyed that. What's the difference between bi and pan? Meaningfully, I don't believe there's any difference. I just don't even think it's worth. I don't even think it's worth thinking about. I prefer pan because I feel like it's a little bit more semantically correct, but it's like it's nothing. I don't care at all. And take that however you like.